She came home smelling like his cologne, with bruises on her thighs she couldn't explain. I didn't ask questions, I just moved out while she was at her next business trip. She returned to an empty house and a note. He can have what's left. But that's getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it really started. My name is Mick Sullivan, and I've been renovating houses for 15 years. I know the difference between foundation cracks that'll settle and ones that'll bring the whole place down. Same goes for marriages, apparently. It was a Tuesday night in October when Sloane stumbled through our front door at 11:30. I was in the kitchen, nursing a beer and going over invoices from the Hartwell job. The numbers weren't adding up, but then again, nothing had been adding up lately. "Hey," she said, dropping her purse on the counter with that particular thud that meant she'd been drinking. Her hair was mussed, lipstick smeared at the corner of her mouth like someone had been careless. "How was dinner with Rena?" I asked, not looking up from my paperwork. "Fine. You know how she gets with the wine." Sloane moved past me toward the stairs, but the smell hit me like a freight train. Expensive cologne. Something woody and sharp that definitely wasn't mine. I wear Old Spice when I remember to wear anything at all. I watched her climb the stairs, noting the way she favored her left leg slightly. When she reached the landing, she paused and looked back at me. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "You coming up?" she asked. "In a minute," I said. "Just finishing these numbers." She nodded and disappeared into our bedroom. I heard the shower start running a few seconds later. That's when I noticed the bruises. Not on her, mind you. On the kitchen counter where she'd set down her purse. 5 small dark marks on her white blouse where fingers had gripped too tight. The kind of marks you get when someone's holding you against a wall or pulling you close or pushing you away. I sat there for a long time after the shower stopped, staring at those marks and thinking about Cologne and lies and the way my wife had looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. This wasn't the first time. 3 weeks earlier, she'd come home from another dinner with Rena, this time with a torn stocking and grass stains on her skirt. "Tripped in the parking lot," she'd explained, laughing it off. "These heels are going to be the end of me." Before that, it was a late night at the office that left her with her shirt buttoned wrong and her hair smelling like someone else's shampoo. I'm not stupid. I build things for a living, which means I understand how pieces fit together, and these pieces were forming a picture I didn't much like. The next morning, Sloane was already gone when I woke up. She'd left a note on the coffee maker. "Early meeting. Home late. Don't wait up. S." Not love Sloane or even just Sloane. Just S, like she was signing a business memo. I poured myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table, looking around at the house we'd bought 7 years ago. It was a good house. Solid bones, I'd told her when we first walked through it. The kind of place you could build a life in. Funny how solid bones don't mean much when the foundation starts to shift. My phone buzzed. Text from Frankie, my foreman. "Hartwell job's ready for final walkthrough. You coming in today?" I texted back, "On my way." The Hartwell renovation was one of those jobs that makes you remember why you got into construction in the first place. Old Victorian house, built in 1892, that had been neglected for decades. We'd spent 6 months bringing it back to life. New electrical, new plumbing, refinished hardwood floors that gleamed like honey in the morning light. "She's a beauty," Frankie said when I arrived at the site. He was standing in what used to be the living room, admiring the crown molding we'd painstakingly restored. Shame to see her sitting empty all those years. "Sometimes things just need the right person to notice them," I said, running my hand along the mantelpiece. The wood was smooth as silk under my fingers, warm from the morning sun streaming through the bay windows. "Speaking of noticing," Frankie said, his voice careful in that way that meant he was about to say something I probably didn't want to hear. "I saw Sloane yesterday, downtown, near that fancy restaurant on 5th Street. I kept my expression neutral. "She had a client lunch?" "Yeah, well?" Frankie shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "She wasn't alone." I waited. Guy in an expensive suit, driving one of those Tesla things. They looked close. Close. Such a small word for such a big betrayal. "Thanks for letting me know," I said. Frankie nodded and went back to checking the electrical outlets. He'd been with me for 8 years, long enough to know when to push and when to let things be. I spent the rest of the day at the Hartwell house, going over every detail with the kind of attention I usually reserved for historical restorations. It was easier than thinking about Sloane and her mysterious bruises and the way she'd looked at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. By the time I got home that evening, I'd made a decision. I was going to find out who he was. Sloane's car was in the driveway when I pulled up, but the house was dark except for the glow of the television in the living room. I found her on the couch, still in her work clothes, watching some reality show about people renovating houses badly. "How was your day?" she asked without looking at me. "Good. Hartwell job's finished. Mrs. Hartwell's going to love what we did with the master bathroom." "That's nice." I sat down next to her, close enough to smell her perfume. Just her perfume this time, nothing else. "How was your client lunch?" She glanced at me, something sharp flickering in her eyes. "Fine. Boring, actually. Insurance stuff." "Frankie mentioned he saw you downtown, said you were with someone." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. On the television, some contractor was explaining why you should never remove a load-bearing wall without proper support. "Just a colleague," Sloane said finally. "We were discussing a potential partnership." "What kind of partnership?" "Investment opportunities, real estate development." She stood up abruptly. "I'm tired. I'm going to bed." I watched her go, noting the way she avoided my eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her voice when she'd said, "colleague." After she went upstairs, I sat in the dark living room and thought about partnerships and colleagues and the kind of investment opportunities that left bruises on a woman's thighs. Then I got up and went to my workshop in the garage. I keep all my important documents in a fireproof safe behind my workbench. Bank statements, insurance policies, the deed to the house, my business license. Everything a man needs to prove he exists and owns what he says he owns. I pulled out our joint bank account statements from the last 6 months and spread them on the workbench under the bright fluorescent light. Numbers don't lie, even when everything else does. There were charges I didn't recognize, expensive restaurants I'd never been to, a hotel in the city center that cost more per night than I made in a week, purchases at stores I'd never heard of, for amounts that made my stomach clench. And there, at the bottom of September's statement, was a charge that made everything clear. Brandt Consulting Services, $2,500. Brandt. That had to be him, the colleague, the partnership. I fired up my laptop and did what any reasonable man would do in my situation. I looked him up. Elliot Brandt, according to his LinkedIn profile, was a strategic investment consultant with an MBA from Wharton and a smile that probably cost more than my truck. His company website was full of buzzwords about maximizing potential and leveraging synergies, but it was light on actual details about what he did for a living. His Facebook page was more informative. Pictures of him at charity galas, skiing in Aspen, posing next to that Tesla Frankie had mentioned. And there, in a photo from 3 weeks ago, was my wife. They were at some kind of cocktail party. Sloane in a red dress I'd never seen before, Elliot's hand resting on the small of her back in a way that was definitely not professional. The caption read, "Great evening discussing future opportunities with brilliant minds." I stared at that photo for a long time, memorizing every detail. The way Sloane was looking at him, the way he was looking at her, the way they both looked like they were sharing a secret that didn't include me. Future opportunities. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet garage, surrounded by the tools of my trade. Hammers and saws and levels, things that built and fixed and made straight what was crooked. But some things, once they're broken, can't be fixed. They can only be torn down and started over, or left behind entirely. That's when I started planning. The pattern became clear over the next 2 weeks. Sloane would announce another late meeting, another client dinner, another overnight trip to review properties in Boston or Hartford or wherever successful financial analysts went to conduct their mysterious business. And each time she came home, there were new signs. A hickey disguised with concealer, the smell of unfamiliar soap on her skin, credit card charges for lingerie I never saw her wear. I documented everything, dates, times, expenses, inconsistencies in her stories. I'm methodical by nature. You have to be, in construction. Measure twice, cut once, plan ahead, or pay later. On a Thursday morning in early November, while Sloane was in the shower getting ready for another client presentation, I made my first real move. I opened a new checking account at First National, the bank across town where we didn't do our regular business. Just a simple account in my name only, with a small initial deposit from my personal savings. "Planning any big purchases, Mr. Sullivan?" asked the teller, a cheerful woman named Dolores, who looked like she'd been working at that bank since the Carter administration. "Something like that," I said. Over the next 6 weeks, I began the careful process of financial extraction. Small amounts transferred at irregular intervals from our joint account to my new one. Never enough to trigger any automatic alerts, never following a pattern that would show up on a casual review of the statements. Sloane handled most of our finances. She was better with numbers, she'd always said, but she wasn't the only one who could read a bank statement. I knew exactly how much we had and where it was kept. I also knew she wasn't paying as much attention as she used to. Love makes you careless. So does guilt. The second phase of my plan required more research. I spent my lunch breaks driving around the city, looking for apartments. Not the kind of place I'd choose if I were starting over by choice, but the kind of place a man could afford when he was starting over by necessity. I found what I was looking for in a converted warehouse district on the east side of town. Industrial neighborhood, mostly small businesses and artist studios, with a few residential units scattered among the commercial spaces. The apartment was on the second floor of a brick building that had once housed a textile mill. Exposed beams, concrete floors, tall windows that let in plenty of light. It was raw and honest in a way that appealed to me. No pretense, no hidden defects. "It's not fancy," said the landlord, a guy named Pete who wore paint-stained jeans and looked like he'd done some construction work himself. "But it's solid. Good bones." "Good bones are all I need," I said. I signed the lease that afternoon, paying first month's rent and security deposit in cash. Move-in date, December 15th. "You'll want to get the utilities transferred," Pete said, handing me the keys. "Electric's already on, but you'll need to call about gas and water." "I'll take care of it." But not yet. Not until I was ready. The third phase was the hardest, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. I made lists, essential documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport, business license, insurance policies. Tools. I'd need those to keep working. Clothes. Enough for a fresh start. Not so much that I'd miss the old life. Everything else, the furniture we'd picked out together, the wedding gifts from relatives I barely saw anymore, the framed photos of happier times, could stay. Let Elliot Brandt figure out what to do with the remnants of someone else's marriage. But there were a few things I wouldn't leave behind. My grandfather's toolbox, the one he'd carried through 40 years of carpentry work, the watch my father had given me when I graduated high school, a small wooden box that contained my mother's wedding ring and a few other pieces of jewelry that had been in the family for generations. These weren't just possessions. They were proof of where I'd come from, reminders of who I was before I became half of someone else's lie. On December 10th, Sloane announced she'd be spending the weekend in Hartford, reviewing a portfolio of commercial properties for a major client. "It's a big opportunity," she said, packing her overnight bag with the kind of care she used to reserve for our anniversary trips. "Could really advance my career." "That's great," I said. "You deserve it." She looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in weeks. "You've been different lately, distant. Work's been busy. The Henderson renovation is more complicated than we thought." "Right, the Henderson job." She zipped up her bag and checked her reflection in the bedroom mirror. "I should be back Sunday evening. Don't wait up if I'm late. You know how these client dinners can run." "I know exactly how they run," I said. She kissed me goodbye, a quick peck on the cheek that felt like a period at the end of a sentence. Then she was gone, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor I'd installed myself 3 years ago. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner. Then I called Frankie. "You busy this weekend?" I asked. "Nothing that can't wait. What do you need?" "Help moving some things. I'll pay overtime." There was a pause. "Everything okay, boss?" "It will be." Frankie arrived Saturday morning with his pickup truck and a thermos of coffee that could strip paint. He took one look at the boxes I'd packed and stacked in the garage and nodded like he understood everything without needing an explanation. "Where are we going?" he asked. I gave him the address of my new apartment. He programmed it into his phone's GPS without comment. We worked in companionable silence, loading boxes and furniture and the tools that represented 15 years of building other people's dreams. It took 3 trips to move everything I'd decided to keep. The apartment looked different with my things in it, more like a home, less like a temporary refuge. I set up my grandfather's toolbox on the kitchen counter and hung my father's watch on a hook by the door. "Nice place," Frankie said, looking around approvingly. "Good light. Solid construction." "Yeah, it'll do." He helped me arrange the furniture and unpack the essential boxes. By evening, the apartment was livable. Not comfortable exactly, but functional. A place where a man could start over. "You want to talk about it?" Frankie asked as we shared a pizza and a couple of beers. "Not much to say. Marriage ran its course." "She know you're moving out?" "She'll figure it out." Frankie nodded and didn't push for details. That's one of the things I'd always appreciated about him. He understood that some conversations were better left unhad. After he left, I sat in my new living room and wrote the note. 5 words. He can have what's left. Short and to the point. No accusations, no explanations, no requests for closure or apologies. Just a simple statement of fact. I drove back to the house on Sunday afternoon and left the note on the kitchen counter right where Sloane always dropped her purse when she came home. Then I walked through the rooms one last time, taking inventory of what I was leaving behind. the couch where we'd watched movies during the early years of our marriage, the dining room table where we'd hosted Thanksgiving dinner for her family, the bed where we'd made promises we both thought we'd keep. None of it felt like mine anymore. It was just stuff, furniture and fixtures in a house that had stopped being a home somewhere along the way. I locked the front door and put my key under the flower pot by the steps. Sloane had her own key. She wouldn't need mine. Then I drove back to my new apartment and waited. Sloane's first call came at 8:47 p.m. on Sunday. I was sitting in my new living room, eating Chinese takeout and reading a book about Victorian architecture, when my phone started buzzing. Her name appeared on the screen, along with the photo I'd never bothered to change, Sloane laughing at some long-forgotten joke, her face bright with happiness that now seemed like it belonged to a different person entirely. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 8:52, then 8:58, then 9:03. By 10 p.m., she'd left 17 messages, each one more frantic than the last. I listened to the first few out of curiosity more than anything else. Mick, what the hell is going on? The house is empty. Where are you? Call me back. This isn't funny. Whatever game you're playing, just stop and call me. We need to talk. I found your note. What do you mean, he can have what's left? Who's he? Mick, please, just call me back. The progression was fascinating in its predictability. Confusion, anger, bargaining, panic. All the stages of someone realizing that the game they thought they were controlling had suddenly changed rules. I deleted the messages without listening to the rest and turned off my phone. The next morning, I drove to the job site where we were renovating a 1920s bungalow for a retired teacher named Mrs. Chen. It was detail work mostly, restoring original hardwood floors, rebuilding the front porch that had been sagging for decades, updating the electrical system to handle modern appliances. You're early, Frankie observed when I arrived at 6:30 a.m. Couldn't sleep. He gave me a look but didn't comment. We spent the morning sanding floors and discussing the best approach for matching the original stain color. Normal work, normal conversation, the kind of routine that keeps a man grounded when everything else is shifting beneath his feet. My phone stayed off until lunchtime. When I finally turned it back on, there were 43 missed calls and 28 new voicemails. I deleted them all without listening. That evening, I stopped by the Iron Anchor, a bar 3 blocks from my new apartment that catered to construction workers and other people who earned their living with their hands. The beer was cold, the bartender minded his own business, and nobody asked questions about why a man might be drinking alone on a Monday night. You're new, observed the woman behind the bar. She was maybe 50, with graying hair and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that came from years of dealing with drunks and heartbreak. Her name tag read Barb. Just moved to the neighborhood, I said. Running from something or running to something? Little of both. She nodded and refilled my beer without being asked. Most folks are. I was on my second drink when my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Sloane. Mick, this is Rena. Sloane's friend? She gave me your number. Rena Martinez was Sloane's closest friend, a real estate agent with perfectly styled hair and opinions about everything. She'd never particularly liked me, probably because I didn't make enough money to meet her standards for what her friend deserved. What can I do for you, Rena? You can explain what the hell you think you're doing. Sloane is beside herself. She came to my house crying, saying you just disappeared without any warning. Without warning? I almost laughed. That's interesting. This isn't a joke, Mick. She's devastated. Whatever problems you two are having, running away isn't the solution. I didn't run away. I moved out. There's a difference. But why? She said things were fine between you. Did she? I took a sip of my beer and watched the condensation drip down the side of the glass. What else did she say? That you've been acting strange lately. Distant. Like you were planning something. I was planning something. I was planning to leave. There was a pause. Mick, I know you and Sloane have had your ups and downs, but marriage takes work. You can't just give up when things get difficult. You're right, I said. Marriage does take work. It takes trust, too, and honesty, and not coming home smelling like another man's cologne. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. What are you talking about? Rena finally asked, but her voice had changed. Less righteous indignation, more careful curiosity. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Another pause. Mick, if you suspect something, you should talk to her directly. Don't just assume. I'm not assuming anything. I'm stating facts. Your friend has been having an affair with a guy named Elliot Brandt. They've been meeting at expensive restaurants and hotels on my dime for months. That's not... Rena's voice trailed off. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question. Sloane said you two were having problems. She said you'd grown apart. So that made it okay? No, of course not. I told her she should talk to you, should try to work things out. But you didn't tell her to stop seeing him. Rena was quiet for a long moment. She's my friend, Mick. I can't control what she does. No, but you could have told me. It wasn't my place. Whose place was it? She didn't have an answer for that. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to tell Sloane that I'm not coming back. You're going to tell her that I know about Elliot, and I know about the hotels, and I know about the money she's been spending on their little romance. And you're going to tell her that if she wants to discuss anything else, she can have her lawyer call mine. Mick, wait. I hung up and turned off my phone again. Trouble in paradise? Barb asked, refilling my glass. Paradise ended a while ago. I just finally noticed. She nodded knowingly. Always the last to know, aren't we? Apparently. I finished my drink and walked back to my apartment, past storefronts and warehouses and the kind of honest, working-class neighborhood where people minded their own business and didn't pretend to be something they weren't. It felt like coming home. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Martha Leeds had handled the legal work when I'd incorporated my construction business 5 years earlier. She was sharp, practical, and had no patience for emotional drama. Divorce? She said when I explained why I needed her services. How long have you been married? 7 years. Children? No. Significant assets? I gave her a rundown of our financial situation. The house, the joint accounts, my business, Sloane's retirement savings. Any prenup? No. Okay, and you said you suspect adultery? I don't suspect it. I know it. Can you prove it? I thought about the credit card statements, the hotel charges, the photos on Facebook. Yes. Good. That'll make things cleaner. In this state, adultery affects property division and alimony. When do you want to file? As soon as possible. I'll need a retainer, $5,000 to start. I wrote her a check from my new account. How long will this take? Depends on whether she contests it. If she's reasonable, we could be done in 6 months. If she wants to fight? Martha shrugged. Could be a year or more. She'll fight. Most people do. Nobody likes to be the villain in their own story. I left Martha's office feeling lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly, but relieved. Like I'd finally stopped carrying something heavy that I'd been hauling around for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. That afternoon, while I was installing new cabinet hardware in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, Frankie approached me with a troubled expression. Boss, we might have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that drives a white Lexus and has been sitting outside for the last hour. I looked out the window. Sloane's car was parked across the street, and she was sitting behind the wheel, staring at the house. She can't sit there forever, I said. You want me to go talk to her? No, let her sit. She'll get bored eventually. But she didn't get bored. She sat there for 3 hours until we finished work for the day. When I walked out to my truck, she got out of her car and started walking toward me. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was messy, her makeup smudged, her clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them, which she probably had since I'd taken the bed. We need to talk, she said. No, we don't. Mick, please, just 5 minutes. I looked at her. Really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with and married and promised to cherish until we were both old and gray. But she was also a stranger now, someone who'd made choices that had nothing to do with the life we'd built together. You want to talk? I said. Talk to my lawyer. What lawyer? Mick, this is crazy. We can work this out. No, we can't. Why not? Because of Elliot? The name hung in the air between us like a challenge. She'd finally said it out loud. Because of the lies, I said. Because of the money you spent on him. Because of the way you looked at me like I was stupid for not noticing. Because you chose him over me every time you walked out that door. It wasn't like that. What was it like? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. It's complicated. No, it's not. You wanted someone else. You found someone else. You chose someone else. The only complicated part is why you thought you could have both. I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen, and you kept letting it happen, for months. Tears started running down her cheeks, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, no urge to comfort her. Just a distant kind of sadness for what we'd lost, and relief that I'd finally stopped pretending it could be found again. I made a mistake, she said. A terrible mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can start over. I already started over. She stared at me. What do you mean? I mean, I have a new apartment, a new bank account, and a new life that doesn't include you or your mistakes. You can't just throw away 7 years. I'm not throwing them away. I'm leaving them where they belong, in the past. I got in my truck and drove away, leaving her standing in the street with her tears and her regrets and her suddenly complicated life. In my rearview mirror, I watched her get smaller and smaller until she disappeared entirely. The divorce papers were served on a Thursday morning while Sloane was at work. I know this because Martha called me at 10:15 a.m. to confirm that process had been completed. How did she take it? I asked. According to the process server, she went very pale and asked if there was some mistake. When he explained that there wasn't, she asked him to wait while she called someone. Her lawyer? Or her boyfriend. Either way, she's been officially notified. The clock starts ticking now. In Massachusetts, there's a mandatory waiting period before a divorce can be finalized. 6 months if both parties agree to the terms, longer if they don't. I was betting on longer. I was right. Sloane's response came through her attorney, a shark named Davidson who specialized in high-asset divorces and had a reputation for taking no prisoners. His letter was 5 pages of legal posturing that boiled down to 3 main points. My client contests the grounds for divorce, my client disputes the property division proposal, and my client demands spousal support. She's playing hardball, Martha observed when we met to discuss strategy. Davidson doesn't come cheap, which means she's serious about fighting this. Can she win? Depends on what you mean by win. She can't force you to stay married, but she can make the process expensive and time-consuming. And if she can cast doubt on the adultery allegations, she might be able to argue for a more favorable settlement. What kind of doubt? Well, do you have actual proof of physical intimacy? Photos, videos, hotel records showing them in the same room? I thought about what I had. Credit card statements, restaurant charges, that Facebook photo. Circumstantial evidence, but nothing that definitively proved they were sleeping together. Not exactly. Then her lawyer might argue that they were just friends or business associates, that the money spent was legitimate business expenses. $2,000 hotel bills for business meetings? Stranger things have been argued in divorce court. Martha was right to be cautious, but she didn't know about the Cologne, or the Bruises, or the way Sloane had looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. She didn't know about the pattern of lies that had been building for months. What do you recommend? We gather more evidence. Credit reports, phone records, anything that establishes a timeline and proves the relationship was romantic rather than professional. How long will that take? A few weeks, maybe a month. But Mick, Martha leaned forward. You should know that Davidson's already filed a motion for temporary spousal support. He's claiming that you abandoned the marital home and left your wife without adequate financial resources. She makes more money than I do. But she also has higher expenses, the mortgage on the house, car payments, credit card bills. Davidson's arguing that she can't maintain her standard of living without support. Her standard of living included spending my money on another man. I know, but the court doesn't know that yet, and until we can prove the adultery, she's just an abandoned wife who needs temporary assistance. I felt the familiar anger building in my chest, the same rage that had been simmering since that first night I'd smelled Elliot's cologne on my wife's skin. But anger wouldn't help me now. I needed to be smart, methodical, patient. What do I need to do? Keep documenting everything, any contact she makes, any unusual expenses you notice, any evidence of her relationship with this Brandt character, and try not to do anything that could be construed as harassment or stalking. I'm not planning to harass anyone. Good, because Davidson will be looking for any excuse to paint you as the bad guy in this situation. That evening, I stopped by the Iron Anchor again. It was becoming a habit, this end-of-day ritual of a beer and a few minutes of quiet before heading back to my empty apartment. You look like a man with problems, Barb observed, setting a bottle in front of me without being asked. Just the usual problems, money, lawyers, ex-wives. Ah, the holy trinity of male misery. I almost smiled. You could say that. How long you been divorced? Not divorced yet, still working on it. She making it difficult? She's making it expensive, Barb nodded knowingly. They usually do. My first husband tried to claim I owed him alimony because he'd given up his career to support mine. Never mind that his career was playing guitar in a band that never made a dime. Did you have to pay? Hell no, but it cost me $10,000 in lawyer fees to prove I didn't owe him anything. That's about what I'm looking at. Worth every penny, though. You can't put a price on freedom. Freedom, I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about buying back my independence, my self-respect, my right to live without wondering what lies I was being told. I was halfway through my second beer when a familiar voice behind me said, I thought I might find you here. I turned around. Elliot Brandt was standing near the entrance, looking as out of place in the iron anchor as a peacock in a chicken coop. His expensive suit and perfect hair screamed money and privilege, everything this working-class bar was designed to reject. "Can I buy you a drink?" he asked. "I already have one." "Then can we talk?" I looked at Barb, who was watching the interaction with obvious interest. "This is a public place," I said. "Talk away." Elliot glanced around nervously, taking in the construction workers and mechanics and other blue-collar regulars who were now staring at him with undisguised curiosity. "Maybe somewhere more private." "This is as private as it gets." He sighed and sat down on the stool next to me. "Look, I know this is awkward." "Awkward?" I interrupted. "That's an interesting word choice." "What I mean is, I know you're upset about Sloane and me, but I'm not upset about Sloane and you. I'm upset about Sloane and me. You're just a symptom." He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "A symptom?" "Of her inability to be honest, of her willingness to lie to someone she promised to love and honor, of her decision to spend our money on someone else's company." "It wasn't like that." "What was it like?" Elliot shifted uncomfortably. "Sloane and I, we connected. Intellectually. Emotionally. She felt like you two had grown apart, that you didn't understand her ambitions." "So you helped her with her ambitions?" "I supported her, encouraged her, made her feel valued." "In hotel rooms?" His face flushed. "Our relationship isn't just physical, but it is physical." That's between Sloane and me." "Actually, it's between Sloane and me. You're just the guy she chose to cheat with." The bar had gone quiet around us. Even the jukebox seemed to have paused between songs. Elliot was sweating now, despite the cool November air. "I didn't come here to fight with you," he said. "Why did you come here?" "To ask you to be reasonable, about the divorce. Sloane made a mistake, but she doesn't deserve to be punished for it." "She's not being punished, she's being divorced." "You're trying to take everything from her." "I'm trying to take what's mine. She can keep what's hers, including you." Elliot leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Look, I know you're angry, but dragging this out in court isn't going to help anyone. It'll be expensive, messy, public. Is that really what you want?" "What I want is for my wife to stop lying to me. But since that ship has sailed, I'll settle for a fair divorce settlement." "What would you consider fair?" I finished my beer and set the empty bottle on the bar. "That's between me and my lawyer, and Sloane's lawyer. You don't get a vote." "I'm trying to help here." "You want to help? Stay out of it. You've done enough." I stood up and left money on the bar for my drinks. Elliot followed me toward the door. "This doesn't have to be adversarial," he said. "We're all adults here." I stopped and turned to face him. "You're right. We are all adults, which means we're all responsible for our choices. Sloane chose to have an affair. You chose to have an affair with a married woman. I chose to leave. Those are the consequences of being adults." But nothing. You wanted her, you got her. Congratulations. Now you get to deal with the rest of it, too." I walked out into the cold night air, leaving Elliot standing in the doorway of the iron anchor, looking like a man who just realized that getting what you want isn't always the same as getting what you bargained for. Behind me, I heard the conversation in the bar resume, louder and more animated than before. By tomorrow, everyone in the neighborhood would know about the confrontation. Word would spread, the way it always does in small communities. Let it spread. I had nothing to hide anymore. The park was empty except for a jogger in the distance and a couple of ducks drifting lazily across the pond. Early afternoon light filtered through bare branches, the kind of quiet, neutral place people choose when they don't want witnesses. Sloane stood beside her car, arms folded tight across her chest, as if holding herself together. "You look terrible," I said, not unkindly. "So do you," she shot back automatically. Then the edge drained out of her voice. "Okay, maybe you don't. You look fine. Better than fine." "That's not an accident," I said. "You wanted 5 minutes. Start talking." She took a breath that turned into a shaky exhale. Brandt left. I waited. He didn't say goodbye. He just packed his things and disappeared. His number's disconnected. His office says he's on indefinite leave. She laughed once, short and brittle. "Turns out when you stop being useful, he's very good at vanishing." "And you came here because?" "Because everything's falling apart," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "The credit cards are maxed out. The firm's distancing itself from me. My friends won't return my calls. And now Martha's filed that amended complaint, and I know what it means." "You should," I said. "You paid for an affair with money that wasn't just yours." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't think it would come to this." No one ever does. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if the trees might be listening. I made a mistake. I shook my head slowly. You made a series of decisions. Over 8 months, according to your phone records. You went through my phone? The court did, I said. I just read the results. Silence stretched between us. Somewhere behind us, a duck flapped its wings, splashing water. I loved you, she said quietly. No, I replied, the word coming easier than it once would have. You loved the life we had, and you loved how invisible I'd become inside it. That made it easier to replace me. That's not fair. It's accurate. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I need help, Mick. I can't do this alone. I felt it then. The old reflex, the instinct to stabilize, to fix, to absorb the damage so things could feel normal again. It was the same instinct that had kept me blind for months. That's the problem, I said. You always assumed someone else would carry the weight. So that's it? She asked. You're just done? Yes. She stared at me like she was waiting for the punchline. After everything we built? We didn't build this, I said, gesturing vaguely at the space between us. You burned it down. I'm just not standing in the ashes anymore. Her shoulders slumped. I don't even recognize my life. That makes 2 of us, I said. The difference is, I'm starting to like mine. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. What happens now? Now the court decides what's left to divide. You get a lawyer who tells you hard truths. You figure out how to live without borrowing someone else's stability. And you? I thought about the workshop, the job sites, the quiet nights in my apartment, the strange, unfamiliar calm. I keep building things, I said, just not with you. She nodded, slowly, like each word had to settle before the next could exist. I'm sorry. I believe you, I said. It just doesn't change anything. We stood there a moment longer, 2 people with nothing left to negotiate. You should move your car, I added. You're blocking my crew. A weak smile flickered and vanished. Of course I am. She got back into her car without another word and drove away, tires crunching softly on gravel. I waited until she was gone, then sat on the bench by the pond for a minute longer than necessary. When I finally drove back to the Chen job, Frankie raised an eyebrow. Everything good? Everything's finished, I said. He nodded, understanding more than I'd expected. Same thing, then. Back in my apartment that night, I reread Martha's email outlining the next steps, court dates, filings, endpoints. It all felt procedural now, like the paperwork that follows a demolition. The truth was already settled. Sloane had chased a version of life that looked brighter from a distance. I'd stayed long enough to see what it cost. And for the first time since this started, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next blow. I felt like I was already standing on the other side. You look terrible, I said. Thanks. You look good. Rested. What do you want, Sloane? I want you to call off your lawyer. This has gone too far. It went too far when you started sleeping with Elliot Brandt. She flinched. How did you... Never mind. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, and it's going to matter to the judge. Mick, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can still fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through it. No, we can't. Why not? Because of your pride. Because of your choices. Because you chose him over me, over us, over the life we built together. Because you spent 8 months lying to my face and using our money to fund your relationship with another man. It wasn't about the money. Then what was it about? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ground between us. I felt invisible, she finally said. Like you didn't see me anymore. We'd become roommates, not lovers. Ships passing in the night. So you found someone who did see you? Yes. And you decided that was worth throwing away our marriage. I didn't decide anything. It just happened. Nothing just happens, Sloane. You made a choice. Every time you met him, every time you lied to me about where you were going, every time you came home smelling like his cologne, those were all choices. I know that now. But you didn't know it then. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was confused, unhappy. You were selfish. The word hung in the air between us like an accusation, which I suppose it was. Maybe I was, she said quietly. But people make mistakes when they're unhappy, when they feel trapped. You weren't trapped. You could have talked to me. You could have suggested counseling. You could have asked for a separation if that's what you wanted. Instead, you chose to have an affair. I'm sorry. I know you are, but sorry doesn't fix this. It could be a start. I looked at her. really looked at her, and for a moment I almost remembered why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. She was still beautiful, still the ambitious, intelligent woman I'd married, but she was also someone who'd proven she couldn't be trusted with the most important promise two people can make to each other. "No," I said. "It's too late for starts." "Because you can't forgive me?" "Because I can't trust you." She started crying then. Not the manipulative tears I'd expected, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone who'd finally realized what they'd lost. "I never meant for this to happen," she said between gasps. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did hurt me. And more importantly, you kept hurting me, for months. Every lie, every deception, every time you chose to be with him instead of working on us. That was you hurting me." "I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you did? I broke our marriage. You broke more than that. You broke my ability to trust, to believe in promises, to think that love is enough to keep two people together. You broke my faith in the idea that marriage means something." She was sobbing harder now, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, that we could find a way through this. But that part was getting smaller every day, overwhelmed by the larger part that just felt tired. "I have to go," I said. "Mrs. Chen is waiting for us to finish her kitchen." "Mick, please." "The divorce will be final in a few months. After that, you can start over with Elliot or someone else, or by yourself. But you can't start over with me." I got back in my truck and drove away, leaving her standing in the empty parking lot with her tears and her regrets and the wreckage of the life she'd chosen to destroy. In my rearview mirror, I watched her collapse onto a bench, her head in her hands, her whole body shaking with sobs. I felt sorry for her, but not sorry enough to turn around. The divorce hearing was scheduled for a gray Tuesday morning in February. I arrived at the courthouse early, wearing the only suit I owned and carrying a folder full of documents that represented the end of my marriage. Martha met me in the hallway outside the courtroom. "How are you feeling?" "Like I want to get this over with." "Good. That's the right attitude. Remember, let me do the talking unless the judge asks you a direct question. Davidson's going to try to paint you as vindictive and unreasonable, but the evidence speaks for itself." Through the glass doors, I could see Sloane sitting at a table with her lawyer. She was wearing a conservative black dress and minimal makeup, probably trying to look like the wronged wife rather than the cheating spouse. Elliot was nowhere to be seen. "Is he going to be here?" I asked Martha. "Brandt? Probably not. Davidson's too smart to put the other man in front of the judge unless he has to." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more like a conference room than the grand judicial chambers you see in movies. Judge Patricia Reeves was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd heard every possible variation of human foolishness. "This is a hearing on the dissolution of marriage between Michael Sullivan and Sloane Sullivan," she began. "I've reviewed the filings from both parties. Mr. Davidson, you may present your client's position." Davidson stood up, straightening his expensive tie. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that this marriage has irretrievably broken down, but she contests the grounds alleged by the plaintiff. Mrs. Sullivan admits to developing a friendship with Mr. Elliot Brandt, but maintains that this relationship was primarily professional in nature and did not become intimate until after she and her husband had separated." "When did this separation occur?" the judge asked. "In December, Your Honor, when Mr. Sullivan abandoned the marital home without warning or discussion." I felt Martha tense beside me, but she didn't object. "Furthermore," Davidson continued, "my client requests spousal support in the amount of $3,000 per month, given that she cannot maintain the marital residence on her salary alone, and an equitable division of all marital assets." Judge Reeves made notes on her legal pad. "Ms. Leeds?" Martha stood. "Your Honor, my client did not abandon the marital home. He left after discovering extensive evidence of his wife's adultery, including hotel charges, restaurant bills, and hundreds of phone calls and text messages with her lover over an 8-month period." She handed a thick folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "These documents clearly show that Mrs. Sullivan used marital assets to fund an extramarital affair, including overnight stays at expensive hotels and purchases of intimate apparel that coincided with her alleged business trips." Judge Reeves flipped through the documents, her expression growing more stern with each page. "Mr. Davidson, how do you respond to this evidence?" Davidson looked uncomfortable. "Your Honor, my client's professional responsibilities required her to entertain clients and attend business functions. The expenses in question were legitimate business costs." "And the phone records?" "Mr. Brandt was a professional contact. It's not unusual for business associates to communicate frequently." "At 11 p.m. on weekends, during what your client claimed were working dinners with other people? Davidson had no good answer for that. Ms. Leeds, the judge continued, what is your client seeking in terms of property division? An equitable split of all marital assets, Your Honor, minus the approximately $15,000 that Mrs. Sullivan spent on her affair. We also request that she be responsible for all debts incurred in furtherance of her extramarital relationship. And spousal support? Given Mrs. Sullivan's adultery and her higher income, we believe no spousal support is warranted. Judge Reeves looked at both lawyers, then at Sloane and me. I'm going to hear from both parties directly. Mrs. Sullivan, please stand. Sloane rose unsteadily, her hands shaking slightly. Did you have an intimate relationship with Elliot Brandt while you were married to the plaintiff? There was a long pause. Yes, Your Honor. Did you use marital funds to pay for expenses related to this relationship? Another pause. Some of them, yes. Did you lie to your husband about your whereabouts while you were with Mr. Brandt? Yes. For how long did this deception continue? Sloane's voice was barely a whisper. About 8 months. Judge Reeves turned to me. Mr. Sullivan, did you know about your wife's affair before you left the marital home? I suspected it, Your Honor. I had evidence, but I didn't confront her directly. Why not? Because I didn't see the point. She'd already made her choice. And you made yours. Yes, Your Honor. The judge made more notes, then looked up at both of us. I've seen thousands of divorce cases, and they all have one thing in common. They represent the failure of two people to keep the promises they made to each other. Sometimes that failure is mutual, sometimes it's one-sided. In this case, the evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Sullivan violated her marital vows and used marital assets to fund her adultery. She turned to Sloane. Mrs. Sullivan, your actions were not only a betrayal of your husband, but a theft from your marriage. You cannot expect to benefit financially from your own misconduct. Then she turned to me. Mr. Sullivan, while I understand your anger and disappointment, I hope you can find a way to move forward without bitterness. Hatred is a burden that hurts the one who carries it more than the one it's aimed at. I'm not interested in hatred, Your Honor. I just want this to be over. Judge Reeves nodded. Very well. I hereby grant the divorce on grounds of adultery. Marital assets will be divided equally, minus $15,000 in reimbursement to Mr. Sullivan for funds used to support Mrs. Sullivan's affair. Mrs. Sullivan will be responsible for the mortgage on the marital home and any debts incurred in her name. No spousal support is awarded. This divorce will be final in 30 days. She banged her gavel, and it was over. Outside the courthouse, Martha shook my hand. Congratulations, you're a free man. How long before it's official? 30 days, like she said. The decree will be mailed to you. I looked back at the courthouse, where Sloane was still inside, probably arguing with her lawyer about appeals or modifications or whatever desperate measures people pursue when they've lost everything that matters. What happens now? I asked. Now you go live your life. Find someone who deserves you. Be happy. I drove back to my apartment through the gray February afternoon, past the construction sites and warehouses and honest, working-class neighborhoods that had become my new home. The radio was playing an old song about second chances and new beginnings, but I turned it off. I wasn't ready for new beginnings yet. I was still processing the end of the old one. That evening, I went to the Iron Anchor for what I decided would be the last time, not because I didn't like the place, but because I didn't want to become the kind of man who drowns his sorrows in alcohol and self-pity. How'd it go? Barb asked, setting a beer in front of me. It's over. Good for you. You look relieved. I am. What's next? I don't know yet. Work, I guess. Maybe travel a little. I haven't taken a real vacation in years. Sounds like a plan. I was halfway through my beer when Elliot Brandt walked in. Again. This time he looked even more out of place, his expensive clothes wrinkled and his perfect hair disheveled. He sat down next to me without being invited. Congratulations, he said. You got what you wanted. I got what I deserved. There's a difference. Sloane's devastated. Sloane made her choices. Now she gets to live with them. She lost everything. She threw everything away. I just stopped pretending it could be recovered. Elliot ordered a whiskey and drank it in one gulp, like he was trying to outrun the conversation before it caught up with him. You know, he said, staring into the empty glass, she really did love you. No, she didn't, I replied without hesitation. She loved the idea of me, the security, the stability, the life we built together, but she didn't love me enough to stay faithful to me, and that's the only definition that matters. People make mistakes. Some mistakes you can recover from, I said. Others you can't. This was the second kind. He shifted on the bar stool, suddenly uncomfortable. So what happens to her now? I looked at him then, really looked at him. This man who had helped dismantle my marriage and now sat beside me like we were old friends sharing a drink after work. That's not my problem anymore, I said. It's yours. Mine? You wanted her. You got her. Congratulations. I took a slow sip of my beer. Now you get to deal with the consequences. What consequences? The mortgage on a house she can't afford, the credit card debt she ran up buying you presents, the reputation she destroyed by cheating on her husband, the friends who don't trust her anymore because they now know exactly what she's capable of. The color drained from Elliot's face. I never asked for any of that. You asked for her, I said evenly. This is what comes with her. I thought we'd start fresh somewhere else. With what money? I asked. She's broke. The house will have to be sold, and after the mortgage is paid off, there won't be much left. Her career is probably finished. Word gets around in her industry. And you? I paused. What exactly do you do for a living, anyway? I'm a consultant. What kind of consultant? Strategic planning, business development. For who? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence filled in the blanks. Credit cards, borrowed time, borrowed money, borrowed confidence. You're both broke, I said. You're both unemployable. You're both starting over from nothing. The only difference is that now you have to do it together with all the baggage of how you got there. We love each other, he said weakly. Love doesn't pay the bills, I replied. Trust me, I know. I finished my beer, placed cash on the bar, and stood. Good luck, Elliot. You're going to need it. I walked out into the cold February night, leaving him behind with his whiskey, his regrets, and a future that had just become far more complicated than he'd ever imagined. Behind me, the bar filled back up with noise. Laughter, arguments, the low hum of ordinary lives in motion. I wasn't part of that anymore. I was something else now. A man who had been married and wasn't anymore. A man who had trusted and learned better. A man who had built something beautiful, watched it collapse, and walked away from the ruins without trying to salvage what was never real. I drove home to my empty apartment, past construction sites where I'd spend tomorrow building other people's dreams, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. The divorce would be final in 30 days. After that, I'd be free, to start over, to find someone who understood what promises meant, to build something new on a foundation that wouldn't crack under the weight of lies. But tonight, it was enough to sit in my honest apartment with its exposed beams and concrete floors, surrounded by the tools of my trade and the remnants of a life I'd chosen to leave behind. She'd come home smelling like his cologne, with bruises on her thighs she couldn't explain. I hadn't asked questions. I'd just moved out while she was on her next business trip. She'd returned to an empty house and a single note. He can have what's left. Now he could have what was left of her, too.